Welcome back. The panel is here. Amna Nawaz, co-anchor of PBS NewsHour. Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and author of The Divider. Longtime Republican election lawyer Ben Ginsberg. And Evelyn Farkas, executive director of the McCain Institute. Thank you all for being here. We are excited about this show. Peter, I want to start with you. You have covered every American president going back to Bill Clinton. I don't say that to date you in any way. But you look great. Including Madeleine Albright, exactly. You have just written a book about former President Donald Trump. 5 months out before the election, how do you think this moment is testing our democracy?
Yeah, it's testing our democracy because there are two ways of looking at our elections. One is the way you did with the Secretaries of State, which talk about the mechanics and the systems and what they're doing to make sure things are working. The other is what you also talked about, which is the faith and confidence in the system, almost as important as how you organize your early voting or how you count, is do people believe that an election reflects an honest counting of the votes? And right now you have, as you showed in that poll, 35% of Americans don't believe that. And that's, I think, the most critical question of our moment right now.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I'm going to pick up on that point, and you also heard my conversation with the Secretaries of State talking about the fact that election workers, that they themselves felt threatened back in 2020, felt real fear for their families. That is part of this erosion in faith.
Absolutely, and those threats have been increasing since 2020. It's not election officials alone. We know federal, state, and local elected officials have also been facing an increase in threats. We know women and people of color in particular are targeted worse for some of those. And we also think more Americans find political violence of some sort acceptable than at any other point in modern history. Not a majority, but more than before. Look, has our country survived periods of political violence before? Yes, absolutely. The period leading up to the Civil War, the war itself, you think about the state and white violence against black civil rights activists in the 50s and 60s. Even then, Kristen, no one tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power through political violence until 2021. And I remember standing outside the Capitol that day and thinking, I have seen these scenes unfolding in countries around the world I've covered, and now it's happening here. So what's underlining a lot of my reporting this season is the idea that our democracy is not immune, and that even though history is a guide in many cases, it's not a guarantee.
Well, Ben, it's chilling, the points that Amna makes, and the rising concerns about political violence, the rising concerns about whether there will be a peaceful transfer of power. You, of course, were on the National Counsel to the Bush-Cheney campaign. Tough, hard-fought victory, and there was a concession. I want to play a little bit of that and get your reaction on the other side. Let's take a look.
Now the U.S. Supreme Court has spoken. Let there be no doubt. While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession.
Al Gore conceding to former President George W. Bush. What goes through your mind when you see that, Ben, and how does that moment compare to this moment?
It says how far we've come as a country, the differences between a defeated candidate in a very contentious election, accepting that because the institution produces a result we need to believe in for the peaceful transfer of power. And fast forward to today in 2024, where without evidence, without close elections, we're calling into question the fundamental accuracy of our elections and the difficulties that that can cause. What it says, I think, is that we are in a very different position, maybe a precipice for the 2024 elections because of the third of the country that won't accept election results, because you have for the first time a major political candidate saying the election is rigged without any proof of that, despite numerous court cases and other opportunities.
Evelyn, what are your biggest concerns as we head toward November?
I mean, I think that my biggest concern, like all of us probably, is that there isn't a peaceful transfer of power, that there's violence again, as we saw in the last presidential election aftermath. This is something that no American wants to witness. And frankly, the other part of it is, of course, that there will be a lot of Americans who question the elections, and that will not go away even after the elections, even if there is a peaceful transfer of power. So again, all of the things that you talked about earlier with the secretaries of state about mis and disinformation. We did a poll, the McCain Institute in Arizona, of youth in Arizona after the midterm elections in 2020, November 2022. Found that only half of the youth believed that the elections were legitimate and the outcome represented the will of the people. That's just 2 years ago. So this trend is not likely to stop even if we have a peaceful election.
Peter, you know, former President Trump, it should be noted, is the only modern American president not to concede. There have been some Democrats who have raised questions, doubted the election results. We saw that in 2004. We saw that in 2016. Where is the line?
Yeah, sure. That, of course, we have. I mean, there have been plenty of sore losers in the history of American politics, right? If you lose an election, you're going to look for a reason why you did. And it's usually because the other side was somehow unfair. And you can complain about the rules. We should have longer early voting, or it's not fair that, they changed the rules because of COVID, or whatever excuses you want to use. Maybe they had an effect, maybe they didn't. There's something different, though, than a handful of, congressmen saying I object during the Electoral College, and what happened in 2020 and what's happening right now, which is to say that the President of the United States at that time urged his Vice President to single-handedly disallow the election that would toss them out of office. Richard Nixon certified his own defeat in 1960 as Vice President. Walter Mondale, as Vice President, certified his ticket's defeat in 1980. We just saw Al Gore, who did the same thing. Yeah. And we have not seen anything like what we have seen, as Amna just talked about, the violence in these last 4 years. And I think that that's an important difference. The false equivalence should not confuse people as to what's happened here.
And Amna, to some of the points that you made, there is this erosion in faith in institutions, in our elections. A poll just conducted in March shows that a third of voters said they're not confident the votes in the presidential election will be counted accurately. How do you reverse that with 5 months to go?
Yeah, look, a third don't believe the results will be counted accurately. A third still believe in the big lie, at least, that President Joe Biden did not actually win the 2020 election. The third, at least, believe that our democracy is not functioning well. This is in the context, we should note, of a decline in trust of all American institutions, Congress, the Supreme Court, the media as well. And we shouldn't lose sight here. These institutions are made up of people. Our democracy is made up of people. I don't think it's about reversing the trends as much as it is moving through this moment. And if I find any sign of hope anywhere, it's two things. One is that we had the highest level of voter turnout in 2020. Some 2/3 of the eligible voting population showed up. That is good for democracy. That's a trend moving in the right direction for democracy. And it's also that 9 out of 10 Americans agree on core democratic principles. Things like the right to equal protection under the law, the right to privacy, and the right to vote. There's a nation in there.
Ben, when you think about our institutions and the lack of faith in our institutions, do you think if the presidential election were to be decided, for example, by the House of Representatives or by the Supreme Court, would people believe that outcome today? What would happen?
It very much depends on how we get there, what the facts are. Every state has the ability to give a recount or a contest or litigation. Those actions actually help to validate the election results. The real question is whether the candidates accept, as part of the rule of law, what's determined in those court cases and recounts and contests. So the factual record is what will determine that. And we are a nation of laws, not of people, yet it is the people who will set the tone on whether those decisions are accepted.
No doubt about that. Evelyn, 30 seconds left. The U.S. is the gold standard, or supposed to be, for democracy. How is the world watching this moment?
The world is watching with a lot of fear and trepidation, Kristen. You know, they saw last time around, for the first time, as Anwa said, we had a violent transfer of power that shook our democratic allies to the core. Freedom fighters, democratic partners and allies are watching, and they're hedging their bets. They're very worried.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.